1 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those online, please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For interpretation online, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I ask all participants to be careful when handling the earpieces in order to prevent feedback, which can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. Please speak only into the microphone your headset is plugged into. Place earbuds away from the microphone when they are not in use. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hands. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. We appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. If any technical issues arise, please inform me immediately. We may need to suspend in order to ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming proceedings. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, October the 17th, the committee is continuing its study of Canadian businesses in supply chains and global market. We have with us today from the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, Dave Boland, Vice President, Newfoundland and Labrador, and from Daryl Nolan, Vice President, Policy Programs and Communications, Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec, Sonia Perron, Deputy Minister, and Marie-Claude Petit, Vice President, Operations, Groupe Gilbert, Maxime Lavoie, Director of Operations, and Surdex International, Nadine Brassard, General Manager, and the Institute, the Economy Contemporary, Robert LaPlante, who's joining us by video conference. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here. Mr. Nolan, I would invite you to give us a presentation of up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the Standing Committee, for the invitation. I'm pleased to be joined here today with my colleague Dave Boland, who, as you mentioned, is the Vice President, Assistant Deputy Minister for our office in Newfoundland and Labrador. Thanks for the invitation to appear. Depuis 35 ans, l'APECA travaille en étroite collaboration avec les petites et moyennes entreprises.
We've been working in close collaboration with SMEs and organizations from the 4 Atlantic conferences. Our biggest strength is to be present in all of the region of the Atlantic. Our employees work in more than 30 communities, ranging from large cities to small, rural, coastal, and remote municipalities. ECOA works closely with federal, provincial, and local partners to identify priorities and opportunities to maximize the potential of our region in a strategic and sustainable manner.
I think it's fair to say that Atlantic Canada is facing a strong momentum of heights that we really haven't seen in the last 60 years. In fact, Halifax and Moncton are 2 of the fastest growing cities in Canada, and population growth, the transition to clean energy are creating significant investment opportunities. And this momentum positions the region uniquely to tap into new markets, participate in global supply chains, and attract investments. Currently, exports comprise over 30% of Atlantic Canada's gross domestic product, with traditional sectors like food, seafood processing contributing significantly to that in that part of the economy. In 2022, the Atlantic provinces marked record export growth, surging 22% higher than pre-pandemic levels. Notably, fish and seafood exports alone are worth over $6 billion, representing 72% of the full Canadian sector. The United States continues to be our dominant market for export, representing about 70% of total exports. Malgré le momentum de la région, les récentes perturbations mondiales et les défis.
Despite the region's momentum, recent global disruptions and economic challenges, such as geopolitical conflicts and labor shortages, have highlighted the vulnerability of global supply chains. Atlantic Canada's concentration on resource-based industries and its small internal market make it particularly vulnerable to these shocks. Emerging sectors like energy and technology-intensive industries present growth opportunities, but diversification remains crucial.
Supply chain development in our region. Most notably, in 2016, the Government of Canada, with ACOA as the lead and Global Affairs Canada supporting, entered into a formal partnership with the 4 Atlantic provincial governments, and together we created the Atlantic Growth Strategy. This strategy has laid the foundation for initiatives like the Atlantic Trade and Investment Growth Strategy, or ATIGS, as I may refer to it. It's supported by a $20 million Atlantic Trade and Investment Growth Agreement, or ATIGA, and this strategy and the agreement aim to increase internal business and attract foreign investment across the region. A signature ATIGA initiative is the Market Entry Development Program, providing in-market support to companies looking to enter export markets in Europe as well as the Indo-Pacific region. From the implementation of this strategy to present, we've supported over 150 projects with valuing over $31 million. In addition, through our regular programming, ACOA's Regional Economic Growth Through Innovation, or REGI program, we're helping firms in technology adoption, productivity improvement, commercialization, and increased export potential and capacity. We advocate for Atlantic firms to be considered in national policies and program, for example, in collaboration with Transport Canada on Green Shipping Corridors program. We also participate actively in the Industrial and Technological Benefits program, which supports investment in the aerospace defense sector. So, avec ça, Madame la Présidente et membres du committee, merci beaucoup pour le temps. Thank you for your time.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity for being here, and I'd be happy to take your questions, Monsieur Perron. Good afternoon, and welcome to the members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to speak about the work done by Canada Economic Development for Quebec regions. With me is Marie-Claude Petit, Vice President Operations. But first, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nations. The agency's mandate is to support the economic development of all Quebec regions, with a particular focus on those with lower growth potential. We support SMEs and the organizations that work with them in projects that have a positive impact on their regions. Market development is a key means for companies to grow by gaining access to new customers or integrating into globalized value chains. In so doing, they generate new revenues, which are reinvested in the regions. This said, these SMEs, which make up the vast majority of the businesses, face challenges in realizing their potential through exporting and internationalizing their operations. Quebec SMEs face a number of challenges. Production capacity to meet demand and the requirement of major customers, including greater compliance with various standards, as well as the costs and risks involved in exporting, as well as a lack of expertise, knowledge, and market access. And this in a rapidly changing and complex world characterized by the changing geopolitical context, the rise of protectionisms, and the supply chain disruptions. In fact, while exports account for 27% of Quebec's gross domestic product in 2022, they have been in relative decline since 2000, when they represented 39% of GDP. However, over the last 15 years, we've seen a rise in production in the manufacturing industry, where there seems to be a rebound in exports.
To address these challenges, the agency used 3 approaches: innovation assistance program, support for the ecosystem that helps businesses, referral and networking services, including the implementation of the industrial and technological benefits policy. In all cases, CIIT provides services tailored to the reality on the ground in the region. CIIT's 12 business offices located across the province are community-focused and understand the feature and needs of small, medium-sized enterprise and economic organizations in their respective area. Dans le cadre du programme de croissance économique régionale pour l'innovation,
as part of the Regional Innovation Program, CIIT can intervene across the entire business development and growth continuum to make companies competitive, from startup through technology deployment or adoption to efforts to commercialize and export products and services. For example, DEC has supported the Chicoutimi-based Conformit Technology, Inc. in the international marketing of innovative health, safety, and environmental software platforms. Secondly, we also support the ecosystem that accompanies SMEs and provides the referrals and market information that they need to grow. For example, CIIT supports 18 regional export promotion organizations known as ORPEXs, which offer Quebec SMEs a local frontline service to facilitate their international market development efforts. CIIT also supports incubators, accelerators, and college technology transfer centers. And thirdly, CIIT itself provides referral and networking services to companies. We do this, for example, by guiding SMEs to the right sources of financing or support. CIIT also implements the industrial and technological benefits policy in Quebec. With this policy linked to national defense procurement, DEC supports SMEs to help them integrate the globalized supply chains of major defense and security contractors.
With key players in the ecosystem, including the Quebec government, with whom we have excellent working relationship, and federal government departments such as Global Affairs Canada, Export Development Canada, Innovation, Science, Economic Development Canada, Indigenous Service Canada, and the Business Development Bank of Canada. DEC accompagne les entreprises à toutes les phases de leur développement et les
DEC
encourage.
supports companies at every stage of their development, encourages them to take advantage of international trade to contribute to the prosperity of Quebec's region. That is how we help them grow, leverage their competitive advantages, and integrate global supply chains. We'll be very happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lavoie, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Oui, bonjour. Premièrement, merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Merci aussi au comité.
First of all, thank you very much. Thank you for greeting us here today. I am Maxime Lavoie. I am the Director of Operations. And I've been in the transport area for the last 20 years. Transport Gilbert has been working in specializing in this area, and we are also experts in other areas such as snow removal. This global represents a great challenge. We're talking about labor, difficulty in hiring, and this means that transport often is difficult. It's difficult for us to follow the rhythm of what is going on. What would help us is to help to set up a network of transportation that would be dynamic, rail, maritime, in order to be able to help world transportation. This is why I'm here today to explain the different challenges that we have. When we're talking about infrastructure, in regions such as where we are in Saguenay, Lac Saint-Jean, it's not well, we need more development. We think that by developing rail and maritime in regions such as ours, it would make it easier to be able to increase the world transportation and supply chain issues. I'm here to answer all your questions, of course.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lavoie. Ms. Brasser, please.
Bonjour à tous. Tout d'abord, merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. On est bien content de pouvoir
Hello,
venir.
thank you. We're very happy to get this invitation to allow us to speak. CERDEX International is a regional export promotion organization called ORPEX, like Mr. Perron was saying. We call it ORPEX, and we are the ORPEX that is in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region. There are 20 such organizations that are financed by the governments of Canada and Quebec also, and partly from private sources. For more than 25 years, our mission has been to guide and equip and support our region's manufacturing and value-added services in our region, and especially with regards to exports. We want to develop markets outside of Canada, outside of Quebec as well. So we are a player in interprovincial trade. As well as being the director of ORPEX in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, I'm also the president of the ORPEX Network Commerce International Quebec. Our network covers the whole of the province of Quebec, and we help more than 2,500 companies every year, thanks to the 65 experts who work with us in international trade. The regionalization of the ORPEX offices in Quebec is very innovative. It allows us to offer specialized services tailored to the different economic structures of Quebec. Moreover, We adapt the services to regional realities while offering local services to small and medium-sized businesses to help them maximize the positive impact of interventions. For instance, the OPEXs are able to assess a company's export potential, carry out diagnostics, offer training, transfer expertise, draw up expert plans, and carry out market studies. Credible ways of increasing the markets. In other words, we follow the companies as they prepare to export and help them reduce the risks. The OPECs have a very diversified clientele base and they operate in different economic contexts. For instance, we have furniture manufacturing, industrial equipment, agri-food products, and even information technology. It is often said that our expertise lies in the expert process, and we are here to ask entrepreneurs the right questions. We also we complement other players in the field. We interact with regional partners, but also export partners such as the Trade Commissioner Service or Investment Quebec International. We have been identified as the regional gateway to the export services continuum. Our services are unique and completely available. Now, if I get back to the more regional aspect of things, what we have seen is that there are some big needs for the regions. The businesses' needs are growing, and we have to keep in mind all of the different costs that are associated with entering foreign markets, as well as the uncertainty of the success of this process. It can dissuade potential exporters from selling their products or their services. So the main challenges that companies face are things like the market knowledge problems, lack of finance and liquidity, as well as logistical obstacles. These issues, combined with companies' sometimes limited resources, make export diversification more difficult to achieve. As you know, exporting small and medium-sized businesses have a positive impact on economic growth. Exports are a good way of reducing vulnerability. The more diversified a company is, the more the products exported in destination markets, the more it is good at reducing the risks associated with foreign trade. We are there to support companies reduce their risks when it comes to exporting. It is important to continue to support this innovative initiative, which allows us to offer local services to exporting companies long term. These companies of today are tomorrow's exporters. I am available to answer all questions.
Mr. LaPlante, you have the floor, please.
Oui, bonjour, Madame la Présidente.
Hello, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my concerns, which have all been raised by the previous speakers. I find it very important to draw your attention to an issue which sometimes seems obvious when it comes to international trade rules. My point of view is, of course, critical and analytical. And the issue is harmonization, standardization of rules and standards between collaborators who are working on the same supply chain. We are in a very particular context right now as we speak. In Europe, there is an agricultural crisis which is affecting many of the economies of the exporting countries. And that puts all of the European Union under a tense situation. Some of the major elements in this crisis, apart from the disparity of incomes, is the difficulties that certain players have to conciliate contradictory standards and trying to find arbitration mechanisms apart from what is already inside of EU rules. This would allow people to find solutions that would be serving the interests of each of the communities internationally, and also promoting an easier and more equitable commercial situation for all parties concerned. So the question of these standards disparities is actually one of the most important areas when it comes to supply chains. Not to neglect logistical aspects and the kind of difficulties that one can have, for instance, in matters of transport or efficiency and controls at the customs controls and other things. But the disparity of these standards, of these norms, mean that the margin of maneuver that the various players can have and their participation to a chain of supply, and it puts a focus on it. And whether they be a supplier or a client. So these disparities, when it comes to standards, not only determine each of the roles of the different players, but it might affect the global performance of the supply chain in which they participate. And that in turn can cause dysfunction or increase other difficulties and the possibilities of participating in this chain of supply or the supply chain. These issues must be conciliated between the various people who give the orders and the different suppliers in or out throughout all the supply chain. So these differences will be noticed, particularly in regards to public policy. And these are the various public policies of the commercial partners which will determine or promote the competition between the players within the same supply chain. Because economic actors are always within an institutional logic which is defined by the various political institutions in the various nations and the participating states. Now, these differences, these gaps that exist because of the different standards and norms that exist in each country as to what does innocuousness or security, safety mean, and all in the context of exchanging goods, but it also affects the capacity to be able to participate in advantageous conditions within this supply chain. When it comes to agri-food, these elements are very intense when it comes to competition and in the various ways. All we have to do is think about what was raised when it comes to the disparity in environmental norms, when it comes to herbicides, pesticides, or anything else.
Mr. LaPlante, sorry to cut you off, sir. The committee members are anxious to be able to ask questions, and your 5 minutes is up, if you don't mind. So the members, I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to finish your comments in response to some of them. But thank you so much. Mr. Martel, for 6 minutes, please.
Merci. Oui, merci, Madame Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all of the people who are here present today. My first question will be for Madame Brassard. Madame Brassard, I was very interested to hear your comments. I've also heard that you have a great need for financing for some of the companies. What are the consequences of this lack of financing? Well, all the steps that have to be made for export are long-term steps. Companies have to invest a great deal of money before they get concrete results from what it is they have undertaken. So these are all the expenses that have to do with business plans, export business plans, labor, these are all extremely expensive. And there are programs that exist to help businesses. And of course, this is very positive and we want more of them. But we also want those programs to be adapted to the reality of the businesses and the way the markets are in constant evolution. When we speak about these programs, we often hear that programs are closed, difficult to get into, and the dates are not there. Our regional businesses, do they have? It seems sometimes these programs aren't really designed for the regional companies. Yes, precisely. Companies risk a lot in order to be able to export internationally, and there's a lot of money involved. And when the programs are closed or they're not available because of the kind of business these people are in, then of course their export plans might be put off. And we don't know when, and so they may not be able to sell what they need to, and they put priorities on other areas that might be more profitable for their business. So the accessibility or better accessibility would be very useful. I have a question for you, Madam, Mr. Lavoie, sorry. How could we improve our business? What could we do to improve the situation for our regional businesses and make them more performant? We know that the chain of supply is concentrated in big cities like Toronto or Montreal. How do you see the situation?
By
developing infrastructures, mainly in regions such as Saguenay, I see that they're not high performance enough, so it's difficult for some of the big clients we have to use the different types of transportation jointly. So often, for example, the train is not necessarily accessible because of a shortage of train cars, a lack of infrastructure, and road transport is what is used. So this makes the companies less competitive because road transport is the most expensive kind. So to export internationally, for example, to ship to the US, the use of road transportation can make those businesses less competitive due to the cost. You have to think about things from the viewpoint of the labor force. For example, for the trucking industry, there's an aging and a shortage of labor force. So if there's no development of the train, in my eyes, it could have an effect. So regarding trade, when we export internationally as well, the relations with the Americans, they have ways of operating with the supply chain, yes. Is there a possibility for collaboration? Is there good collaboration between us and the USA when we export there? The different stakeholders, if we talk about the rail system, the relationship is quite difficult and can imperil some of the opportunities for companies. For example, in terms of rail, for the clients that we serve, yes, we're regularly told that it is an issue. I mean, in the regions, frequently, they use trucks and they transport materials to Montreal, or Quebec City or Montreal. How can we improve the rail transport system when it's CN that has a monopoly over that? Can Transport Canada do something? I think that Transport Canada could, of course, be very useful because the railway belongs to the company that operates it. So right now, the only company serving the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, and I imagine that is the case in other regions as well, the company that owns the railway, they're the only company that can provide the service in those regions, which is the company that owns the rail system. So then it would require so they would have to develop infrastructure. Yes, develop infrastructure or have a more open market to enable other companies, for example, to use the railway, as is done in roads. Roads are used by many transporters.
Mr. Sidhu?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for our witnesses for being here today. My question is for Mr. Nolan. You mentioned in your opening remarks about the Atlantic Trade and Investment Growth Strategy and how it's helped over 150 projects. Can you maybe give members of this committee some examples of successful businesses that have participated in this program? And maybe what kind of services ACOA has provided to them?
Sure. Madam Chair, thank you for the question. So I mentioned the Trade and Investment Growth Strategy, and essentially what it is a $20 million 5-year FedProv agreement shared between ACOA and the 4 Atlantic provinces. So they all sit around the table. We're all contributing financial partners. As well on the federal side, we have our colleagues at Global Affairs, Trade Commissioner Services, and sector departments, depending on what sector we're working with, come into the table to help us do those things. So we hit 2 main priorities, I'd say, underneath that agreement. Basically what that is trade readiness. So helping those firms that have not had any or very little experience in terms of exporting. So we work either directly or through third parties to help deliver training, mentorship programs.
So I've got less than 45 seconds, but is there any business examples you can give us, or maybe some stories?
Sure. I can tell you, for example, in Red Space, who's a Nova Scotia company that works in the IT media platforms. They're a part of a market export development program. Through that, they've signed 2 new partnership agreements. They get sales in the neighborhood of $250,000, and they've generated a bunch more leads results of that. Subsea, who's a Newfoundland company that does custom-built underwater cameras, they participated in the same similar program. As a result of that, they've identified a new distributor in Germany for their products and services, an agreement again in the neighborhood of $250,000, and a number of new leads that will lead to new business for them.
Madam Chair, I'm going to turn the remainder of my time to Mr. Arya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the pandemic gave us a very good wake-up call to understand how critical is global supply chain and how we are dependent on it and how it affects everyday life of all Canadians. We have come out pretty well. I think last year, 2022 figures, we ran a trade surplus of $4 billion against the deficit of $1 billion in 2021. Our focus on to diversify our exports to non-US is showing results. I think it is expected to increase by 50% by 2025. Canada-US trade, we have reached a record $1.3 trillion in trade. And the trade to GDP ratio has gone to the historic high of 67.4% in 2022. Foreign direct investments in Canada hit a record last year. I think OECD ranked us 3rd in absolute terms, not per capita. Per capita, probably we are number 1. However, we should not forget that just because things have come back to normal, or rather even better for Canada, we should not forget the problems faced by Canadians during the pandemic due to disruptions in the supply chain. Canadians did pay a very deep price when we did not have goods in the stores. Canadian companies, businesses did not have components to supply to their customers. And now with the deglobalization that is happening, with the de-risking of supply from China and with the friend-shoring, on-shoring, near-shoring, the global trade is in a very transformative process. This fluid transition time gives us an opportunity to look at the problems that we did face during the pandemic due to supply chain disruptions, and we can take measures to mitigate the issues that we faced there, and to focus on the critical things that we need to, say, manufacture here, that we should focus on self-reliance. So I would like to ask Mr. Perron and Mr. Nolan, in Quebec and Atlantic Canada, are they aware of any particular business sector or major product lines that was disrupted due to the supply chain disruptions during the pandemic? And if they're aware, any action is being taken by the businesses or by the governments, whether it's the federal level or the provincial level, to mitigate the problems that faced due to global supply chain disruptions?
Madam Chair, maybe a brief answer to this important question. The way the the regional development agency works is mostly to support the small and medium-sized business. So we do not necessarily touch a full sector. We work business by business in various sectors to try to improve their capacity to supply and participate. So two things we are doing intensively right now is to help automation, building automation in enterprise to give them some flexibility.
I'm sorry, Mr. I got, I think, 45 seconds. It's okay if you're not aware of any business sectors, business lines, or the product lines that were disrupted due to supply chain issues. And if any of the witnesses, if they have answers because of the time limitation, you may not be able, I will not be able to discuss with you personally, but please do feel free to write to us, write to the committee that we can consider the things that the committee or the study has to look into, make a note of the important things that the committee can and should focus. Mr. Nolan, if you can, if possible.
There's 8 seconds left, and we're very tight in order to get the members a chance to ask their questions.
Madam Chair, I know time's short, but maybe we can get something in writing in terms of business success stories from both Mr. Nowlin and the Quebec agency as well. Thank you.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 6 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, sorry, just a quick, I think to correct Mr. Sidhu, I don't know if he was looking for success stories. I think Mr. Arya was looking for perhaps some hiccups in there. I know Mr. Sidhu would love to highlight the success stories, but perhaps I could supply both there.
Yeah, both. Whatever reports you have that the members are not able to get enough information from, regardless of which side is asking, it would be nice to supply the additional reports. Okay, Mr. Savard-Tremblay, we start now with your 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Monsieur Laplante, vous
Thank you,
avez...
Chair. Mr. Laplante, you spoke at one point. You spoke a lot about standards, and you also talked about public policy and the Institute of Research on Contemporary Economy in another committee, in the committee, Standing Committee on Transport, with a brief in the spring of 2022 that was also on supply chains. There were several observations. In particular, we can read that Canada is a country that traditionally is non-interventionist in terms of industrial policy, the effect being that this causes a delay in Canada compared to its main partners and competitors in trade. And in your opinion, the effect of the government's involvement, I'd like to ask you, first of all, actually, if you would reiterate 2 years later that same observation that you made before this other committee today. For the most part, yes. That doesn't mean that there were no initiatives that go in the right direction, but there is still a lacking in most of the main sectors. There's a clear lack of specific objectives with a strategic focus shared by all of the stakeholders. And this is something which compromises the most the participation in success in the major supply chains, because all of the stakeholders have to grasp the opportunities and identify, or grasp the issues and identify which are the sectors where there are priorities to be dealt with in order to ensure that competitive advantages of each sector in the industries can be maximized through the export strategy. So, in a few words, it is those objectives that determine the strategy and not the other way around. It is not the strategy that determines what the objectives are. So this is particularly important in key sectors such as agri-food and also the various export and natural resources processing sectors. In that same brief, you also referred to, you stated that Canada had always been very slow in terms of spending on research and development, in particular when we compare levels in the average of OECD and the G7. So you recommend to improve the fiscal advantages and policies to facilitate that in terms of logistics and the integration and of technology 4.0 in businesses. Can you give us, in research and development, can you give us some more details on the impact of this low investment of R&D in the supply chains. In fact, has that improved since then? Actually, it's scattered, and that's our main problem, because we are not accompanying our efforts with a feedback measure or system in order to really get a good grasp of which of our efforts are really bearing fruit. And that's particularly the case, for example, in an emerging sector, which is research in IT and in artificial intelligence technologies, where we published a study that shows that the work for support of research by the various governments is, in a sense, canceled out after 4 or 5 years, because the intellectual property of those patents is something we lose because they're resold as soon as they reach a certain level of maturity that starts to be attractive from a trade viewpoint. So, first of all, we need operational objectives that are better defined, and in particular, a system of monitoring to ensure that, first of all, the funds that we devote to it pay off and do provide results, and furthermore, that those results, that we can maintain them in the value chains and in the supply chains of an economy in Canada and in Quebec in particular, in the area of artificial intelligence. It's absolutely essential because we devote substantial efforts to providing support to that key sector where we excel. But we are not succeeding in maintaining that position unless we get a better control over ownership and a better monitoring of intellectual property.
This is my last question. I understand that there's very little time left. Again, in the same brief, you say that Canada is at a loss because international companies established in Canada control most of the imports and exports from Canada. That is the export and import of goods. We understand that you'd like to see Quebec to stop losing its potential, that it supply locally, that it reestablish its giants of industry. In a few seconds, what is it that we can do? Well, what we can do, there is no simple solution to this. However, first of all, it's important to better understand the situation, make sure that all of the actors understand it. That is, we need a mutual understanding of the issues, and that is a first step, and that is a first step we need to accomplish to then set a roadmap. And this roadmap, again, will be based on the incremental control, that is to work locally throughout an entire supply chain to increase the leeway of the sectors and the actors who take part in this supply chain.
On to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you all for being here today. I think I'll start with Mr. Nolan. You mentioned some of the challenges that businesses are facing because of supply chain interruptions caused by conflicts, caused by labor shortages. So I wonder if you could maybe expand on the labor shortage part, which sectors are most hard hit by that, and what, if anything, is being done to address that?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the question. So I think you'd be hard pressed to find a sector in Canada that's not affected by labor shortages. That's the reality that we have right now, and you see that playing across all sectors. In Atlantic Canada, certainly a large part of our export industry is around seafood and seafood products. In Atlantic Canada, some of that is quite labor intensive, or traditionally has been quite labor intensive. One of the things that we're doing, one of the main things that we're doing, similar to what Mr. Perron had mentioned in terms of supply chain challenges, is helping businesses invest in automation. So making systems that work faster, that work more with robots, work more automated, so it actually requires less people. Some of those jobs are the hardest jobs to fill. They're difficult jobs. They're difficult working environments. So having investments in automations and new machinery is probably the best way that we can help our companies not only address the labor shortage, but it also helps to ensure a more high quality, high consistent product, which is really what's demanded in export markets right now.
And is there any connection, at least where I live in British Columbia, there's a big connection between labor shortages of all sorts and housing. Is that the case in Atlantic Canada as well? Or we just can't, if we hire someone, they come in and there's no place for them to live. Is that an issue?
Of course. I mean, I think that's, again, that's a question that's facing all over the country and all over the world, quite frankly. Businesses are definitely investing in what's the word I'm looking for? Housing for their workers, temporary in most cases, some cases more permanent, particularly those businesses that are attracting foreign workers. In the industry that I mentioned, it's a lot of temporary foreign workers because it's a seasonal industry, and they do have workforce housing and accommodations available. That's not to underestimate the size of the problem. It's definitely a challenge across Canada.
Thank you. And Monsieur Lavoie, you mentioned the labor issues as well. Is this mainly with trucking and truckers? Is that what you were referring to, a labor shortage? Or is it?
We're facing labor shortages in all sectors. And regardless of the job, it's hard to recruit people and hard to retain them. Regardless of the type of job, yes, it's very difficult. We're having serious labor shortages.
Monsieur Perron, I just wanted to ask you about Quebec. We've heard, at least in conversations I've had here, about some exciting news in Quebec about more tech industry, battery plants, hydrogen, needing skilled labor. But I'm just wondering if there's supply chain issues in those enterprises, getting the materials needed for them, being able to supply materials to other parts of the supply chain. Is there any specific stories you have about supply chain problems in the high-tech sector?
I would say the story we have is much more related to the pandemic and the end of the pandemic. We are getting back into normal. And what I was trying to say earlier is automation and the right systems in the company. Small, medium-sized businesses sometimes do not have the capacity to build a resource management system. We need to equip them with these tools so they can connect with the rest of the supply chain and be in real-time exchange of information and be able to leverage their partnership in Canada, in Quebec, elsewhere in the world in order to balance their operation. This is where technology and automation is critical. Next time we face a challenge, and we don't know what it will look like, if these small businesses are better equipped in that sense, they will be able to perform better and stay relevant in the context and maybe operate despite the challenge. And we need this. The time where everything was manual is basically a challenge for the future. We have to give them to automation, modernization, and this is the type of program that ACOA and CIIT are supporting the small, medium-sized business to move in with the support of the ecosystem. It's essential. We have a challenge in Quebec, and I think it's probably the case in Atlantic Canada as well. Our small, medium-sized business are on average smaller than what you will find in Ontario. So it means you have less human capital, you have less resource to be able to handle this transformation. And this is why we are essential in working with them, along with the ecosystem, to help these businesses to go a step beyond so they are better positioned to survive and perform in the international commerce, but also survive crisis in the future. And this is really, really important. I think if there was an indicator I would be looking for, Mr. Canning and Madam Chair, is that indicator about the level of automation in our small, medium-sized business. This is one factor of resilience that we have to watch for.
Thank you very much. Now we have 6 minutes left. We've completed round one. Would you like to have 2 minutes, 2 minutes, and 1 and 1? Anybody got a fast question that they'd like to ask? Anybody got a question? Nobody's got any questions? Okay, quickly, if you have a question, Mr. Cannings.
Well, I'd like to ask Monsieur Laplante if he just has a quick answer of what this government could do to, what levers could you pull to produce a more reliable supply chains?
First of all, you need to perfect monitoring system. The components that are at the basis of developing supply chains and everything that has to do with the evolution of public policies and standards require a very tight monitoring. And therefore, they need to be better supported by economic development of Canada, and that area can certainly support and strengthen the capacity of each one of the participants and to ensure them that they can best contribute to the overall supply chain. Thank you. I have a question. Well, I just want to say this. Last December, the Conservatives wanted to stop the vote. They had a marathon vote. They were filibustering, and they were cutting back the CED and ECO as well. But Mr. Perron, perhaps you could speak to the Regional Economic Development Program. How does this help companies to assist? How does this help them in further developing? Well, this program has a number of facets. First of all, we enable companies to increase their competitiveness so that they can be competitively globally, internationally, alongside other similar companies. They become relevant for major employers because there are major opportunities with these major companies. But again, you have to meet with their requirements. And the third part is that we help them in export projects. That is, our friends from ECOA have developed export programs with SMEs, and they come to see us whether or not we could co-fund. And so we often do this with our program that you've just mentioned, but we also do this with the government of Quebec. We invest resources to come to the assistance of a company. The money there is often reimbursable, but has to be paid back over a very long time. It provides companies with a great deal of leeway so that they can implement new production methods, as well as undertaking export measures and to manage risks tied to this, and it prevents them to be only productive in the short term. So we work over the long term with them, and I'm sure that the situation in Quebec, as it is in Atlantic, is that these companies come back to a certain level of their growth. We've seen small companies that were tiny companies that have become major companies that are now exporting. They're very resilient with a diversified market. So I understand that this is a lever. Yes, and it's ongoing. These are not programs that stop and start. There is no date. People come back with a project, but we continue working with them to move forward on these projects.
Do you have a question?
I'm happy to keep us here, but no, I'm good.
Okay, Mr. Savard-Tremblay?
Oui, Monsieur Laplante, vous avez parlé de cette harmonisation.
Mr. Laplante, you had spoken about standardization, the harmonization of standards. Again, how do we maintain a right to legislate, that is, to avoid non-tariff barriers, but not to the extent where we're self-censoring as we adopt policies that would support the environment and hygiene methods, etc.? Well, it's the opposite, because the best means of contributing productively to economic development is to focus on having a better control on the end game and our objectives. So sacrificing standards and rather renouncing in any way whatsoever in terms of our objectives, that means that we are no longer calling on our ability to mobilize these actors around stimulus, around objectives that are beneficial for all.
Okay. Mr. Martel, quick.
Rapidement.
Very quickly. It'll take me a minute. I have a minute. That may not be enough. It's from Ms. Brassard. I have a question, because I'd like to know about the financial programs. How can these be adapted to better protect companies when it comes to the vulnerabilities and risks involved in exporting. As Mr. Perron has indicated, obviously, first of all, companies have to have a good strategy and plan in place. They need to be challenged in terms of what they do. They mustn't repeat the same thing over and over again. They have to innovate. They have to do new things. They need to have a plan in place, something that is achievable. Then these programs have to meet the actual needs of companies. Sometimes we want to go to a certain place and then we get to that market that we had planned and we're trying to validate things. But at the end of the day, we realize that we should have gone elsewhere. So we have to be flexible. So I know that's the case in some programs, but it does have to stay quite open to enable companies to be agile, because when you export internationally, it's absolutely key to be agile. The programs must remain agile so that they meet with the company's needs.
Thank you very much to all our witnesses. It's very valuable information. If you have anything in a written report that you'd like to submit, please submit it to the clerk for the whole committee to have. To my colleagues on the Ecuador Free Trade Agreement study, we should have our witness in by Friday, February the 9th, Mr. Cannings, and for CARM by Thursday, February 15th. Everybody's in agreement with those deadlines? Thursday, February 15th. Okay, everybody's good? Okay, move adjournment.